Hey everybody, James here with Laughing Dragon Foundries. So today we're going to be talking about 5 potential reasons that your hot end may be clogging. Now if somebody came to me and said, hey, I've got a hot end clog. Normally, if you're where I'm from, I'd say, well, you need some more fiber. What I do recommend is if you haven't watched our video about deconstructing a hot end, I would recommend you do that first so you understand the pieces that make up a hot end, and you'll find the link for that right over there. First reason why a hot end may be clogging is this little guy right here. This is the nozzle. These are typically, unless you're using an aftermarket nozzle, these are typically made of brass. So brass is a very soft metal, all right? It doesn't take much to wear it down. That's the downside. The upside is it conducts heat really well. So that's one of the main reasons that they use brass in the nozzles, is because of its thermal conductivity properties. But again, because it's a soft metal, the continuous pushing of filament through this nozzle is going to score the inside of it. Because of those scores inside of the nozzle, where filament starts to collect, and eventually it's just kind of like too much traffic on the expressway. Eventually it grinds to a halt. Now the good news is they're cheap. Bought in bulk, these are anywhere from 25 to 50 cents a piece, so they're not really expensive. If you don't know this, when you replace this nozzle, you need to do it while the printer's at full temperature, so at roughly 200 degrees Celsius. Reason number 2, now we're getting a little bit deeper into the hot end itself. There's this thing up here that's called a Bowden tube. Again, if you don't know that, go back to our other video that explains the pieces. This Bowden tube's purpose is to get the filament from the extruder motor into this hot end. A couple things about this Bowden tube that you need to understand. It does break down over time. So the end of the Bowden tube could become a little bit deformed and a little bit sticky because of the amount of heat that it's been subjected to over a period of time. This Bowden tube goes all the way down into your heat break, which resolves about halfway down your heating block. So it's right there in game central when it comes to the heat. So the first thing that could be happening to cause a hot end clog, if the nozzle doesn't fix it, replacing the nozzle doesn't fix it, the next place I'd look would be the Bowden tube. We want to pull this Bowden tube out and inspect the end of it. This pressure fitting at the top will release it, and we'll pull it out and take a look. Now this is brand new, so of course it looks new. But over time it's going to get dark brown, maybe even black, and it might even look a little melted on the end. Even though this is PTFE tubing, it can break down over time. So if it looks good, then just put it back the way you found it. If it doesn't, then you want to get a tubing cutter and just snip the end off of this. You want it trimmed at a 90-degree angle, as perfectly as you can get it. Now you can use a knife or a pair of side cutters if you choose to, but I recommend using something that was made to do this job and to do it well. This is a tubing cutter. You can get them on Amazon, and you just lay your tubing in here like that, so it's nice and straight, and then the blade comes down on it, and you just click it shut, and there you go. So now when we put this back into our hot end, it will butt up against the nozzle very cleanly without any potential for making any kind of a leak. One more little thing here that can really mess you up, and this is part 2 of reason 2. The Bowden tube needs to be seated right up against your nozzle, which means it has to travel all the way through this hot end and resolve halfway through this heating block where it butts up against the nozzle. If you leave even a ½ millimeter of gap, this is what will happen. At the end of your filament, you'll get a little ball that will plug up your hot end. So what I do to make sure that that doesn't happen, I'll take a permanent marker, and before I put my Bowden tube through, I'll put it halfway down the block, and then I'll mark the top where it comes out against the compression fitting. So now when I push this Bowden tube in, as long as that black mark is just slightly above or close to my compression fitting, I'll know this is in far enough. So let's go ahead and push it in. And there you go. So you can see now, I've pushed that all the way in, and the mark is gone, which means that Bowden tube is butted up right next to the end of that nozzle. That's reason number 2. Reason number 3, the combination of your heating element and your thermistor. One or both of them may be going bad, may be faulty, all right? Which means this heating block and the nozzle are not heating up hot enough to turn this filament from a solid into the state, the semi-liquefied state it needs to be in order to come out of the nozzle. Especially if your thermistor says, oh yeah, we're at 210 degrees Celsius, but your heating block might only be hitting 175 or 150, and the heating element itself is wearing out, and they wear out over time. These are not very expensive. I want to say they're like maybe 10 bucks, 5-10 bucks, depending on where you get them. Just have some on hand and make that part of your troubleshooting regimen. So you're like, okay, I've replaced the nozzle, we've checked the Bowden tube, everything's fine. Let's go ahead and replace this heating element and the thermistor. And by the time you go through those 3 things, you should be arriving at a solution. Number 4, for some reason the fan on your cooling zone here goes faulty. It may lead to what's called heat creep. And that means the heat is now creeping from here, your heating block, where it's supposed to be hot, up through your hot end. And it could potentially create clogs further up the line. Now, a surefire way to know whether or not your fan is working is to look at the blades on the front of the fan. If they've stopped spinning, it's not working. It's time to replace it. Something else to consider is maybe cleaning that fan. You get dust and hair and other things that get built up on that fan. It may still be spinning, but it may not be spinning at the full rate that it's supposed to be. I use just a chip brush, turn everything off, take a chip brush, and just gently blot it out and scrape the dust and other debris off of that fan to keep it working again at full speed. The good news, again, a cooling fan, not very pricey to replace, and they actually do make aftermarket cooling fans that have a little more horsepower to them. You might want to, if you're having cooling issues, you might want to swap it out and get something that's got a little bit more horsepower to it, a little bit more cooling capability. And we'll be doing a video on printer upgrades such as fans and hot ends and things like that in the near future too. So keep an eye open for it. Subscribe to the channel. We'll be sure to let you know. So that's reason number 4. Number 5 is one that nobody ever really thinks of, and that is the filament itself. If this filament is out of spec, in other words, if it's too large in diameter, it could be meeting up with too much resistance, either in the Bowden tube or in the hot end itself. The way to test this is just to take the filament and run it through the Bowden tube. There should be a little bit of resistance, but not a lot, because again, this is a Teflon tube. It should slide through fairly easily. And that's part of the reason why they make these tubes out of Teflon, is to reduce the amount of drag. If you put it in here and it's really difficult to push through, that might be an indicator that your filament is a little bit out of spec. So again, quick review, the 5 reasons. Clogged nozzle, too much gap between your Bowden tube and the nozzle, heating element and thermistor, cooling fan, either faulty or just not working at all, and then finally, out of spec filament. So to make this more relevant, I'm bringing these to you because these are the 5 reasons that we've experienced clogging in our hot end here. Maybe your experience has been different. By all means, subscribe, share with us what your experience has been and what kind of clogs you've had, and maybe we'll do a video based on your response as well. Our objective here is to make sure that you have the knowledge to make the best prints that you possibly can. I'm James with Laughing Dragon Foundries. Be sure to subscribe, follow us, check out all of our videos. Don't forget to comment because we love to hear from you guys. Keep your filament dry and your hopes high. We'll see you next time.